Again, I don't think there's one formula for success. Everybody talks about grit. Grit's always been around since, heck, I was that tall. You have to be determined around what you've got.
Welcome to In the Jumpseat, where we bridge the gap between human factors and ergonomics research and new and innovative technology applications. Just like the pioneers of human factors who sat in the jump seats and watched pilots interact with the cockpit, we empower people with technology to do their jobs even better. I'm your host, Joe McDonald, CEO and Principal at Jumpseat Research. Let's jump right in. Welcome everyone to another episode of In the Jumpseat. We're excited to have you with us today and incredibly excited to have Robert Douthit with us. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a lot of exciting things to talk about. Robert has a very long and successful career both in military and in industry, which is pretty much unheard of these days to be able to make that transition and have all the accomplishments that Robert's had. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But he's also, what I know about him is he's a connector of connector. He's always at the exciting events in military and tech and innovation, getting you into places that you probably couldn't get into otherwise, or at least close enough to them to meet the right people. And so we're really appreciative of that relationship and friendship that we have with Robert. You know, I like to say, I don't know if you know the game, 7 degrees to Kevin Bacon.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd say it's probably 2 degrees to RD. So thanks for always connecting us and keep us plugged in this space. It's been really, really amazing. So we'll start off with a formal bio here, and then we'll get into the questions. Just to give you a little bit of background on Robert, he served 20 years as an Army aviator from 1986 to 2006 with combat and peacekeeping deployments to Iraq, Somalia, Bosnia, Albania, Kosovo, and then back to Iraq in April 2003 to March 2004 as commander of the 4th Squadron Air, 3rd U.S. Cavalry Regiment, which was the first U.S. military unit to occupy Al-Assad. He finished his career as a branch chief in the Department of the Army's G3 Combat Capabilities Requirements Directorate. Following his military service, Robert spent 14 years at Dell Technologies, where he managed several customer-facing sales engagement centers, including NYC, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Santa Clara, Mexico City, and Sao Paulo. So I think we actually just missed each other at Dell. I was at the CTO organization. At Dell, Robert's team engaged with Dell customers ranging from small to medium businesses to the biggest names in the business, providing them with technology briefings, architectural design sessions, and conducting comprehensive technology proof of concepts. Also while at Dell, Robert represented the company at a White House ceremony supporting veteran employee initiatives. Additionally, on Dell's behalf, he testified before Congress as they considered legislation to enhance veteran employee opportunities, which, you know, is the largest concentration of veterans in the country here. I'm sure so many people appreciative of that work. Another feather to add to his cap here is Robert is an experienced investor in several startups and provides business and leadership consulting with military and dual-use startups, meaning technology can be used for military purposes as well as civilian purposes, and navigating the funding and requirements development process towards becoming program of record, which is what we all strive to do when we work in this space. By way of education, Robert is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. He also earned a Master of Social Science from Syracuse University and an MBA from the University of Tennessee. He's a rated aviator in both the AH-64 Apache and UH-60 Blackhawk. Robert's military education and training also includes the U.S. Army's Ranger School, Jump Master School, and SEER School. So we're excited to dive into a number of these different areas here. So much to talk about today. So thanks so much for being here, Robert.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invite. I look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Absolutely. So let's start with just a little bit of your background in the story. So how did you start getting interested in the military, and can you kind of talk through that and your time at West Point and as an officer? Just a little background.
Yeah, so my father was in the Army for 2 years in the early 50s, and of course, post-Korea, got out and became a teacher and a coach, but stayed in the reserves for 29 years past that. So he would go every summer for 2 months, but not 2 weeks to active duty. And so I was sort of exposed to this military environment, and I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, right by Redstone Arsenal, and went to school with a number of kids that you would rotate through as their parents were through the Arsenal. And so sort of my dad imbued me with this sense of service, right? You know, give back to what you're doing and that kind of stuff. I love my dad. 700 people came to his funeral. I'd love to be the man he was. And so he set a really good example. I have an older brother who actually went to West Point before I did, and so sort of watch that go on, and you go, this would be neat. I wouldn't have to decide what to wear to school every day, right? Because somebody would tell me. Same way going to work once you graduated. So that's how I ended up at the academy. And of course, the first couple of days, if not the first year, is a little tough. But the bonds, the friendships that have now lasted 40 plus years are difficult to match. But other people obviously have great relationships. But so that was a tremendous experience. I thought I would stay 5 years in the Army, which was the commitment from West Point at the time, and then go back and do something, out in the business world. That 5 turned into 20. We thought we would look at the Russians from 1986 to whatever our time of service was. We're in the midst of the Cold War, maybe the height of it, go back to the 60s. But of course that's not the way things went. That empire falls, and we end up deploying to Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I ended up with a small task force in Somalia. I was not in the streets or in an aircraft. I was in the headquarters, but then got back to the regular Army in the late 90s and flew all over Bosnia, and then subsequently Albania, Kosovo, when we went in the very first day with the peacekeeping mission, and then back to Iraq again in 2003 and 4. So that was the experience. Again, lifelong friendships, learning that can't be done anywhere else, but maybe the crucibles of deployment, and so yeah.
Wow, incredible.
And the last part, I guess I should say, the last part relative to this was I spent 2 years in the requirements division at the Pentagon, watching how organizations, I'd just come out of Iraq and Squadron Command, and all these programs for what was then canceled Comanche money was going to be repurposed into other aviation programs. And so these PEOs would come through, and I didn't, I was shepherding them through the process, through the AROCs, through the JROCs, and where they were in the milestones of the process. And so, that was the end of my military career and then into the commercial world.
Great. And for the listeners that aren't familiar with PEO, Program Executive Office.
Sorry. I'll try to use as many acronyms as possible without defining them today.
It tends to be an alphabet soup when we get into it, but no, understand. So thank you. In your time throughout the course of, starting 40 years ago and that, how have you seen technology evolve either as an aviator or, in the requirement space when you were there at that time? What kind of major changes did you see taking place?
Yeah, so you probably can't tell from the podcast, but I'm an old guy. When I started in the mid 80s, we had all these major systems that were relatively new with the Bradley, the Abrams, the AH-64 Apache, the Black Hawk, the MLRS, multiple launch rockets. So this sort of Patriot. And so I had all these modern systems, and those are still all here today. So when you look at that, was in and of itself a significant shift and an integration of technology from the early 80s to where we are today with all the service life extension programs, SLEPs, and things that go on. What I think, at least my opinion, what we're seeing today, so what I saw was incremental improvements in sort of these systems, which we still see today. I think you're seeing probably a generational, what they call a revolutionary military affairs, with the technology and the things that we do with autonomous capability, whether that's on the ground, on the water, under the water, or in the air, and the delivery mechanisms and the control mechanisms for kinetic systems and observing systems is obviously mushroomed, right? The speed at which technology continues to move. So while we thought we were dealing with the latest and greatest, it was the latest and greatest in the mid 80s and the mid 90s and in the early 2000s. We're just watching that continue to accelerate over time with how we interact with all these myriad systems that are capable of delivering, again, kinetic, lethal effects across the battlefield.
Excellent. So all that technology, and I was just talking to a platoon sergeant the other day who was bringing the Bradleys into the war in Iraq the first time, and they didn't even know that FLIR was on board. So he was blasting, Geronimo when they were coming around the corner, and they were giving him a hard time about it. And he brought the 6 over and said, "No, we can see. We have night vision on board, right?" So it's funny how those technologies change so quickly sometimes for people to keep up and everybody to know what's on the same page with those technologies. So let's switch gears a little bit if we could and talk a little bit about navigating the defense space. So, you're working a lot with startups now. You've done from the investor side and also consulting in this space. What do you see as the biggest challenges right now that they face in navigating the whole defense ecosystem and how they get plugged in?
Yeah, if I give anyone the impression I've mastered navigating that system, I've misled them and you. If you look at the way the regulations were written in the most recent, sort of in the mid '80s, and then we just continue to expand upon that, and the path to sort of success, and there are a couple of name brands that are continuing to blossom, maybe household names in the startup space. But for most people who have just a great idea that they want to provide to the Department of Defense, that remains a tough road to hoe. Tough road to hoe. It's probably an old man expression there. There are multiple paths in, whether through SIBRs, sitters, non-dilutive, or if you've got somebody else who you take dilutive capital. Part of it is being, you talk about connecting, is being where the decision makers are. And by my observation, having watched Futures Command come here, and I was I was fortunate enough to be involved in part of that recruiting process. They called Dell looking for somebody that would have some experience that could talk to the search committee, and I ended up going down for a couple meetings, once with the preliminary search and now with the Undersecretary of the Army. Watching what's blossomed here, but victory doesn't come to everybody, right? They don't, just because it's a great idea, does it fit? Has technology moved past it? Does the developer, the creator, know where it best fits? And does the military services, do they recognize, the potential? There are no bad guys here and girls, no bad guys and girls. It's everybody trying to do it the right way, the best way, the quickest way, at the least cost and the most profit, and to put the best equipment and tools in the warfighter's hands. So part of that is understanding the ecosystem. Who's making decisions? If we, and most of my expertise is around the Army, but when you look at the CDIDs or the other elements around where the CFTs and who has the money, what color is the money, and how much can I get and what is the process? There is no simple way to get there. There are methodologies and there are organizations out there today that help people do that kind of process. I sort of counsel and consult on where do we want to go? What problem do you think you're solving? Who are you talking to and what have they told you on the defense side? I'm by no means an expert on the congressional funding, so that once you get these SIBRs, but then you want to get to a program of record. But my advice would be, you got to be consistent, dare I say tenacious, right, in seeking out who you think the users would be until they just tell you no, and they may tell you no. We're obviously in a sort of turbulent may not be the right word, but a time of dramatic change in how the government's going to allocate money. There are certain frameworks and parameters, obviously, that are set by Congress. Of course, the Department of the Army, the Department of Defense, the executive branch has a process, that they're sort of reviewing dramatically, or to go, where are we going to spend money, where are we not going to spend money. So I think it is to seek advice. Don't be paralyzed by all the advice, or be fearful of the mountain is too tall to climb. Because if you're passionate about it and you have the right product, as you continue to sort of mold that product towards what looks even better, then you're going to move towards success. Not everyone's going to be a success because not every product is necessarily the right answer.
Right. Well, good. I hear that term, what color is the money, going around. Can you kind of flesh that out a little bit?
Yeah, when they talk about, and I think most startups understand this. And I don't, the colors, I can't even remember if they've changed. Back when I went through the requirements program, you go through this week-long process and you see these charts and diagrams, and your eyes roll back in your head around, who has approval processes, and some of that changes over time. But when you get SIBR or sitter money, right, small business incentive rewards, that's non-dilutive money. As the government's going to give you, and it just says, look, we're going to go jointly develop this. I'm giving you money to see where you can go from this, and that goes through those particular phases. To get to the programs of record, right, where it says, I now have congressional support that the line item shows up, and I'm going to be able to consistently receive money to field a program that one of the services has said, this is, on my needs requirement, right? This needs to be part of the Department of the Air Force, the Department of the Navy, or the Department of the Army's budget, the Special Operations Command, whoever owns actually the funding lines. So when we talk about these colors, it's where does is the funding continuous, or continuous out to the length of the program, or is it, hey, here's a one-time check, go do the best you can, and I'm oversimplifying that, but let's stay in touch and see how far the technology gets, and then we'll come back to you. And then, not to the color piece, but ideally you'd like for the service to go, okay, now we think we're getting there, right? And then they begin to cull the capabilities inside the service around, yeah, you should look at this. If you have capabilities that cross the CFTs, which doesn't happen often, or who really owns the power at this time in terms of allocating the money, that's how you get to move forward.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think a lot of people navigating that is helpful to understand from a requirements expert in the field how kind of all of that starts from the beginning and rolls out to the program. So that's fantastic. Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about, obviously we specialize here in the human technology piece of this. So we'd love to spend a little bit of time there and just from your perspective, understanding where you see the biggest challenges in terms of, the new things we talked about. You talked about drones coming on the scene. There's kind of the one-to-many control of unmanned aerial or ground systems now being put in soldiers' hands that maybe are not familiar with that technology. So from your background, working directly with these technologies, what is your thought around this modern warfighting approach that we see kind of rolling out across the branches?
So a couple thoughts in terms of where we are as humans and sort of our own limitations. In my career, towards the squadron I commanded had really 4 or 5 different types of aircraft in it. It was an air cavalry squadron. And I had spent, the bulk of my time flying AH-64s, but got a Black Hawk transition right before taking command. We deployed to Iraq, and I was in the Black Hawk at, 300 or 400 hours, and I went to my instructor pilots and said, hey, I'd like to get back in a gun as well. And so ended up flying both, staying current in both the Apache and a Black Hawk during our deployment to Iraq, always with a typically more senior pilot, because I'm memorizing 2 emergency procedures and they're different systems. And of course the aerodynamics, principles of flight are essentially the same, but they're both helicopters, but they're different processes, switches, technology around, how you're doing things in order. And so I was always cognizant of making sure I had to know what I needed to know, but we put the best teams together, right? So there's a human interface element to this piece on top of all the technology. So when we look at, and you're really the expert on this as we move through this technology, and the questions around how much can one human hold and maintain and optimize in operating a weapons system, right? Or how much knowledge is required to optimize that platform. In an AH-64, you've got multiple weapon systems you articulate and can engage with. In a Black Hawk, you different weight considerations and characteristics around getting the airplane, onto the ground under certain conditions in a very small place and out very quickly. So this concept of how much the human can interface with. And as technology and we look at manned and unmanned systems flying in the same airspace, or ground control systems for one-to-many, the drones, right? What is the level of capacity for that human to optimize that behavior, and at what level do those decisions get made? The United States considers ourselves an ethical, moral nation in terms of combat. As we discuss such, the laws of land warfare, the Geneva Conventions, and everything else. So that I've often heard, never will, a drone initiate contact. Well, as we reflect on that, when I pull the trigger on a weapon system, whether it's a rifle or a missile system that's once launched, guided, self-guided, it's left the rails. I can do nothing with it. Right? The decision was made. Well, of course, I verified the target. Okay. If I look at automation today, and let's just use as an example ground drones, and I'm sending ground drones, the questions would be, where are those levels of control around how many can I control? How many decisions can I make? And if I have 3 different ground elements at work, and one is going on a resupply mission, and one is going to essentially a free fire zone where we know that only bad guys are in that area. And if those ground drones go to that area, and then once they're in the free fire zone, what control do they need? If it's a resupply mission, how much autonomy can I give them, just get from A to B, or what decisions need to be made? Or is it some mixture thereof that if they are interdicted for some reason, how would they react? So the human that sits in the middle of this, how many systems or different, we'll call them armies or units, can one human interface with and control autonomously? We think of the drone pilots today that operate one single aircraft, right? And they do it from somewhere in the United States, and they go home at night and eat dinner, or get up and do it overnight and go home and eat breakfast. But the question becomes a level of control and autonomy at which you're willing to release kinetic, if not lethal, effects. And then, of course, how do you optimize the human's performance? It says, well, if it's just a resupply mission, I can probably use 1 to 20. I'll make these numbers up. If it's a kinetic operation that says, I'm essentially remotely driving it. Okay, well, maybe that's 1 to 1. Like we go back to the aerial drones. Or at what level do I create a capacity or the algorithm to say, which happens today, where it's software that says biggest threat, not so big a threat. And does a human have to enter that loop every time to make that decision? And what are the cases? I don't pretend to have the answer, but in terms of the considerations around controlling these, the drone wars, right? Star Wars, drone wars. How the science sort of the human brain and in our own ethics will control how we do that. And I think we have a lot to learn collectively around the art and science of the possible, which includes not only the systems that can be operated with artificial intelligence and everything else, but about the real intelligence, the human intelligence.
Right. No, it's hitting it right on the head in terms of that decentralized control. And you made a great point. It's more of a system of systems that these folks are controlling, and what is that limitation cognitively and capacity there? That's starting to shift. So great to hear kind of that perspective on it from those different scenarios, whether that's kind of an ISR, intel, surveillance, recon versus direct strike, and
logistics. Simple.
Logistics.
The whole span of missions that get conducted in a combat operation.
Yes, right. And considerations need to be different for those in decision-making process. So, any other kind of around technology? So you're at here in Austin. We have the Capital Factory.
Yeah.
You're there quite a bit as well as us in terms of young startup companies that are either in this dual-use space or developing strictly for defense. What are some of the innovations that you're seeing right now that are kind of really exciting you coming out of that space that you think are going to make a big impact?
Well, I think we already talked about autonomy, right?
Yep.
My time at Dell, I was surrounded by people with much larger brains than mine, right? They would talk, deep technology with somebody, and I would go, hey, how was lunch today? And so I sort of was a spectator to, if I could use that word, to this artificial intelligence years ago. That my team members would talk about this thing, not so much in a military application, although not void of military application. We obviously had customers come through, and now it's become much more. It's much more real. Right? Everybody sees the AI implications today, and the ability for autonomous operations will change the way we conduct operations, military operations. It's going to change everybody's life, not just in a military perspective. For the startups that are navigating the space, again, I don't think there's one formula for success. Everybody talks about grit. But years ago that used to be the term. I don't know, it's 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. Grit's always been around since heck I was that tall. You have to be determined around what you've got. The process, I won't say it's unfriendly. It's just, nor Byzantine is probably not the right word. It's industrial, right? And there are really some great people out there who've led innovation over time. One guy that comes to mind is Pete Newell, who was I knew back when he was in the Ranger Regiment. I was in the 160th, and Pete commanded one of the Army battalions that helped the Marines take back Fallujah, and then he ended up commanding a brigade again in Iraq. And then he became sort of the director of the REF back in the 06, 08 time frame, I think, which was a rapid equipping force. And the Army got into this iterative process, right? And so for these startups that are looking to break in, places like the Capital Factory, where you sort of have these economies of scale. Now, again, there are a lot of fish swimming in that water, right? And what places like, and it's not the only one in the U.S., and there are other events where these things go on, but you've got to bring together these engagement opportunities with some of the decision makers in the Defense Department. You know, you've seen multiple DIU, right? Every every service has its own sort of reach out capability, right? And they all have different levels of funding and different paths back to colors of money. What can be done with those dollars?
That's
right?
a Defense Innovation Unit.
That's right. I'm sorry. Yeah. So DIU stood up back then around how do you take these innovative ideas, go back to sort of the Silicon Valley, and it started out in California, out in the Valley, but then there's an office obviously here in Austin as well, right? Essentially one of the branch offices where there's actually human people you talk to and engage at events where the Defense Department comes to, and there's probably, at least the Army puts on, Futures Command puts on, I would conservatively say probably 4 to 6 events a year if we throw the South by, sort of they're riding on the coattails, not in South by this year, but riding those coattails and having the event coming up this weekend at Capitol Factory. Getting involved in those events, right? It's the easiest way, and I laud that, quite frankly, the Army or any of the uniformed services that come to that, because they're going to be just engulfed in people, right? And sifting through, but that's where you make the contacts and you realize they're human, right? They're not, it's not just, I'm not sending something off into Ethernet at the Pentagon and it never gets responded to. But you hear from their mouths, the first person, here's what we're looking to do. And General Rainey, to his credit, has talked about, I come from the requirements background in the G3. It doesn't sit in the G3 anymore. It's all under Futures Command, so the task is different. But you hear from the military at these events, and of course it comes out in technical writing and all the different sort of requests for information, but to understand what maybe they're really asking for. And General Rainey's talked about just give them a couple sentences. Don't give them a thick manual that says, I need it to be this fast, carry this much ammo. Sure, yes, we need the basic sort of capability, but I'm really looking to overcome this threat or be able to deliver these effects. And let the ingenuity of the industry, right, the agility of the innovator, the entrepreneur come up with these ideas and go, oh yeah, I see this, right? So my encouragement to the startups is get involved. Now, some of that obviously takes time, and it may take money if you're not in Austin or DC or the Silicon Valley or near some place where these things occur. But I think the engagement with the government, and it can be very frustrating, right? People change out of roles, or the world changes under your feet. Right, it's just there's a leap ahead technology, or but you need to stay with it, right? There's a old adage we used to talk about even back in the mid '80s. It was part of our military development. Does technology change tactics and operations and strategy, or does tactics, operations, and strategy dictate what technology needs to deliver? And that's really sort of a circular discussion, because you begin these applications around what can I do with this latest technology that wasn't conceived before, or in this threat environment, what do I need to defeat something that the enemy has come up with that I was heretofore unprepared for.
Right. Yeah. No, and you bring up a great point. And I know one thing that aligns with that a lot is I've heard General Rainey say a number of times that technology has great promise, but technology can also increase the punishment of an unskilled unit or an unprepared commander, right? So it's that part of bringing that technology into a place that's ready to be received and integrated well into kind of a traditional way of doing things in the military, and how do you get those two worlds to meet? So
right. My impression, again, having been around this now for years, in this generation, previous to my requirements time, is that they really do want to hear good ideas, setting the right expectations around where that goes. If you've never dealt with the military before, you may not understand exactly how that works. And so there's some eye-opening elements. To the military's credit, with so many innovative ideas, how do I inculcate the best of the best? And they put out information that says, hey, look, here's our general problem set. How would you overcome it? How do they intake that? So I wouldn't be shy. I guess my recommendation would be not to be shy, not to be foolhardy and spend all your money traveling to an event in Germany or Hawaii. Not that, there are events there that I'm going to. But as you entrepreneurial develop something, for the defense of the nation or dual use capability, there are some companies that, do mining work or literally for mines that now extrapolate themselves into military application. And you go, and these are brilliant. They're large brains. I walk next to them so knowledge does not fall out of their heads because they're just that smart. But they begin to see from a civilian application over to the military. And of course, I think most people know, but in case you're just starting, dual use reduces your risk, right? Can I get adoption in the civilian world, possibly, and then militarize that? Or can I, use something for military operations that, oh, golly bum, look, there's this application of, dearming it or lowering the requirements, and it can operate in the civilian world, which lowers the risk for the government, right? Great, fabulous, and lowers the risk for the entrepreneur and the startup as well.
And it's encouraging to see that real people coming in and saying, here's the strategy that I'm setting, or here are the expectations that we have. We want you to get out there and innovate. I heard a stat recently that China, our near peer, is creating a drone a second, right? Yeah. And they produce 90% of the drones that you see out there in the world. So a huge need in the U.S. to innovate in that way, and you see that reflected, at least from the generals that I've seen speaking to how they want to start driving innovation within their own unit. So can we switch gears a little bit and talk about kind of current day? Yeah. What's going on in defense? Obviously we've had a change in the administration. We've got a new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. His big thing is the warrior ethos, deterrence through strength. Just your thoughts in decades of being in the military and understanding how these things can impact the future. How do you see this kind of impacting acquisition or innovation in the military moving forward?
How long's the podcast?
Yeah, that's right.
I've always sort of read history, even as a kid, and particularly military history. And you look at sort of these changes in technology over time. Combat will always be dangerous. It will always be, sadly, lethal when people fight over things that they have decided are worth life and death. Watching the speed at which technology moves and how we intend to employ that technology at scale and at speed still requires, commitment, ethics, morals, right? To go build field and do things in this sort of focused environment. Back to you asked at the beginning of your podcast, how to end up in the Army. My dad was a deacon in the Baptist church, high school football coach, and this country's been good to you and seems to be doing the right thing. Most of the time, he never made me, but that's go be part of doing the right thing. I lost 12 soldiers in combat, and other friends in every deployment I was on. Sadly, doing something for the warrior, providing them the best possible equipment, whether that is to keep them alive or to destroy the enemy, it's important work. You never want to be threatened or succumbed by a bully or somebody that says you can't do that, or your family, or your country, or your nation, or the values that you stand for. And so, in this day and age, it's a little. I think it's refreshing that we talk about that, not specifically the warrior ethos, but how do we create the best capability to the ethos of making the military lethal, survivable, right? It's hard to argue with those things, right? How you go about doing that, how you make the most effective use of the funds you have, right? And then optimize that. We have our own challenges just in industry, right? In terms of our shipbuilding capabilities or submarine, whatever the challenges are we have in this. We've also got to produce a lethal, mobile, agile, think whatever adjectives you'd like to throw on top of that, of a manned military force across multiple services. The entrepreneurs themselves are critical to doing that, and getting the services aligned on their mission, or to stay aligned and focused on the combat elements and power projection and everything else. Keeping Congress aligned on how do you fund that, right? Are we funding the right things? And in the end, and out of all that, being a force for good, right? In other words, that warrior ethos exists to protect the rights and the privileges, if you will, that we all say we stand for. So this is it's a team effort. If you go back to World War II and the arsenal of democracy that sort of is responsible I'm off topic here, but there's an excellent Netflix, and I don't think I'm getting any money from Netflix on
Not
Churchill,
yet.
on a documentary on Churchill, and it talks about his his career and how where he was going to rise to. But as World War II was starting, it was he was going to get America involved, right? That's we're going to bring him in, and Churchill's a brilliant leader, certainly not perfect, but what is it we stand for? And so this warrior ethos applies not just to the military, and I would say warrior necessarily the right word for the country, but do we stand for the right things, right? That obviously gets open for debate from time to time. I do think it's going to focus differently, right? In terms of, some will argue better, some will say worse. But it's going to put us in line to make hard decisions, which, what with the next technology, with Patriot and Apache and Black Hawk, aging systems that we just keep adding to. Just going to upgrade the Apache. The Army did away with its, advanced long range, future long attack or reconnaissance aircraft, and we're going to upgrade the Apache. All of that stuff is about producing warriors, producing the best lethal capable force. We'll see where it goes.
No, well, that's great. And supporting the warfighter, I have a lot of family members who have been there and are disabled vets in this area. So, a big passion for me personally as well was to get out there and help integrate technologies that are going to be, successful in the battlefield, right? So definitely resonates with what we're doing here, and kind of a whole passion behind supporting the warfighter and what they do. So, I appreciate that perspective. Well, it's been a great conversation. Really enjoyed it, Robert, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did want to leave it with our listeners to know where to reach out and get in touch with you. So I did mention that you're all over the place. You're obviously an international traveler at all the exciting events, and just the best person to know in this space. But if they want to reach out directly, do you have anywhere they can contact you?
The easiest way, if you see me somewhere, just come up and introduce yourself and give me your card, because this white hair is a sign of wisdom, but it doesn't mention forgetfulness. And it's really sort of dark brown. The lighting is terrible in the podcast room. My email is robert@infrontconsult.com. There's no ing. That domain name is taken, but robert@infrontconsult.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to chat with you. It's interesting to talk to people that want to do the right things or looking to solve problems. The people have always said, thank you for your service. I remind them it was my honor and privilege to have served with the brave men and women for 20 years, and then be around these people trying to solve tough problems today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure, and really appreciate it. It's an honor having you on the show.
Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Really enjoyed it.
I'm going to need to see how my skin looks.
Yeah.
We just did some AI touch-up maybe on the lighting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Get some water here for a second. I've got a frog in my throat as well.
I'm emotional as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was trying not to cry.